It's Lucy Litch, and this is Tiny House Conversations. It's the Australian-based podcast where I interview experienced tiny houses, tiny builders, and adventurers in the tiny world so you can discover how to create, build, and transition into tiny life. So you want to go tiny, but you might be wondering, where can I park my tiny house? I want to let you know that I have a special unreleased podcast episode of tiny house parking success stories from other tiny houses who were just like you and who have easily managed to find a long-term parking space for their tiny home. Some of them have even found more than one space. So if you want ideas on finding a parking space for your tiny, you can download this episode for free. To get access to it, head over to tinyhouseconversations.com/tiny parking. If you enter your details there, I'll send it straight to your inbox. Now let's intro today's episode. Hey, it's Lucy, back with another episode of Tiny House Conversations. On the show today, I have Adam Hickman, who's a carpenter and natural building practitioner originally from the UK, but now based in Victoria, and who lived in a converted tiny house truck with his family several years ago. These days, Adam and his family live in a Strawbale house, which he constructed himself, and Adam also runs a tiny building company called Evergreen Homes. And in this conversation, we talk about what it's like to live in a converted tiny house truck and how it was constructed with about 85% recycled materials. Adam's experiences of living in a like-minded tiny house community. We also talked about what a Strawbale house is and the features included in Adam's current family home. All about Adam's tiny building company, Evergreen Homes, and plenty more. So, on to this tiny house conversation with Adam. Adam, thank you so much for joining me on Tiny House Conversations. It's so great to have you here today.
Oh, thanks for inviting me. It's really exciting to be a part of, carry on being a part of the tiny house movement and, share my story and hopefully inspire some people out there
Yeah, for sure. So great to have you here. And, Adam, I know that you're a self-employed carpenter and natural building practitioner, and you previously lived with your partner in a converted tiny truck several years ago. And I know now that you've kind of transitioned with your family into a Strawbale house in Victoria. And so today in the conversation, I'd love to hear a bit about your experiences of living in both of those small spaces. But first up, are you able to start by sharing with us just a bit about your background, how you discovered tiny houses, and maybe some of your reasons for going tiny?
Yeah, so I moved to Australia about 11 years ago now. And I was doing construction in the UK from when I left school. Yeah, so when I came to Australia, I was a bit sick of the construction industry, to be honest. I sort of wanted to get out of it and hang out with people my own age. And we were living in Melbourne. And I just got a job in a vintage shop and cafe in Brunswick. We ended up traveling around Western Australia for 6-7 months to do my working holiday visa. And we were woofing on organic farms, and we met some really interesting people, and it really sort of opened our eyes, sort of taught us more about living on the land, sustainability and permaculture and natural building. And when I heard about natural building and specifically earthships in the beginning, it just sounded like sort of perfect sort of balance of connecting my building skills with sustainability. That was just the spark and the beginning of this whole journey into natural building, more sustainable living for ourselves, our family, and hopefully society, like trying to live the change you want to see. And I suppose on that journey, we moved from the city into, we started a small community in the north of Victoria in Seymour, and we were there with friends. Maybe there was about 7 of us. We were living firstly in our tent on a 16-acre property cooking all our food on rocket stoves, and a couple of people were in cars and vans, and a little cob house that we sort of built on in a workshop we ran there. And there was a lot of sort of fire energy of people that were real doers that wanted to make change and actually implement it. And it was, we all fed off each other, and it was just this amazing, potent energy of change and fire and youth, and just very, very exciting time for us all, and really happy memories of that time. And during that, I met a good friend of mine to this day, Rob Scott, who started a company called Studio Trucks, and he was one of the sort of pioneers of the tiny house movement in Australia, as far as I'm aware. And his tiny house story was out of necessity, and so was ours, really. Like, we needed a space we could be comfortable on the land, something that was, could be built quickly, be transportable if our living situation changed, to building requirements as far as council and stuff. I started working with Rob and building some tiny houses probably 7-8 years ago. Sort of hard to remember with a timeline now. So much has happened over the last 10 years. But yeah, that was the instigator for us to build our own tiny house. And that was the start of our tiny house living journey, really.
It sounds great. And you mentioned before there about community. So did you find that there were other people also living, like you mentioned Rob, but then were all the other people that were part of that community, were they living in small spaces too that they'd built themselves, and so that you're all there together? Or
we built a little 10 square meter cob house, which another couple, Jesse and Danny, were living in, and then we built a little 10 square meter super adobe dome that with a little mezzanine that we sort of used as a bit of an indoor communal space. But then someone else had, it was a bit of van life happening with a couple of people with sort of semi-converted vans. And then we had like a big outdoor area that we built with a fireplace in it. That was sort of our communal area. There was a lot of, like, it was pretty renegade and pretty, but like amazing and potent. And like I said, like just super inspiring. And we used to run workshops from that property, and we had visitors from Melbourne just constantly. I think the energy of that, what was happening, was so tangible and inspiring and connecting, for us all. Like, it was a very transformative time for us all, I think.
Yeah, I can imagine. And I think there's something beautiful to be able to, share land and live nearby to, or with a community of like-minded people. And I'm wondering as well, because I know that then there's also the aspect of, when people are like-minded, and there's also the reality of, everyone has sort of different ways of living and being, and maybe there's like different perspectives, or people are going through different things or have different goals. So I'm just wondering, were there any challenges that you came up around living in community with people as well?
Oh, heaps. I think the social side is probably the most challenging aspect of living in community. At that time, we were very, very focused on open communication, doing circles, sharing circles, like NVC, nonviolent communication. We were very much, it wasn't just about our individual development. It was about our collective openness and development, and broadening our consciousness together as a group, and moving past this insular nuclear way of living. So we all had a real passion for that. So that was which is a sort of essential to live in community with people, is to have an ability to share and listen without judgment and loving kindness. And it was clunky at times, but after that community, we moved to another community, which is one of the longest standing communities in Australia, called Common Ground, which is in Seymour in Victoria. And they had a lot of elders there that have been going since the 80s, which they developed an organization called the Group Work Institute, which is still running and amazing in Melbourne to this day. And it was sort of what we were missing at the other community as far as this grounding, mentorship, elders energy that's what we gained from living at Common Ground community, as far as tools, like developing our tools for communication and working in groups. And that was the next journey of living and learning and living with people on that level. So that was the next step of the madness that's happened over the last 10 years.
Yeah, and I think you just touched on something there too, talking about how, something that you felt like maybe you were missing in the previous community was that eldership and learning from those that may be on the path a bit longer and, have different wisdoms to share and to help guide individuals or the whole community. And I think that just in general in our modern Western society that we're also missing that, right? And there is this more individualism of separate families, of course not everyone, but just in a general sense, the family unit is not like the village anymore. It's like the individual, it's the parents and the children and that kind of thing, or at least it can be often. And so, I really love that because we are communal beings and we are designed for connection and being together and collaborating and, this deep connection and belonging and feeling like we're part of something that's greater than just us as the individual. So I really love that. And I can imagine there would be so many, as you say, so many beautiful and positive things. And then by the same token, lots of challenges too. And as we know, when being in relationship, that is often where our biggest lessons and challenges and shadows may be illuminated and all of that. So it's really cool to just hear different experiences. And we mentioned before, like you were in that converted tiny truck. So I'm just curious, like what was it like to live in that space? And then what kind of setup did you have? I'm assuming that you were off the grid, and what kind of materials and things did you use to construct that?
The day I remember the day the tiny house wasn't finished, but I remember the day we got solar sorted out and we had lights for the first time, and all of us in the community just sat on the floor in there and had dinner. And it was, I remember it so clearly. Just this liberation and empowerment of having our own space. It was real flash. Like, it was super awesome. And I can't remember what year it was, but it was New Year's Day. We started building it. It was 43 degrees in northern Victoria. And one of my best mate from the UK, Ben, had flown out 3 days before to spend time in Australia, but to give us a hand. And my other very close friend, Tommy, he came up too. And the three of us worked on it for a couple of weeks in the blistering sun. And then we just had this amazing, like, we had so many of our friends come up and help throughout the build, which, we're forever thankful for. And it was such a lovely experience to like co-create that tiny house together as a community. And it felt just so fitting to have that sense of community actually in a building sense. I've been collecting recycled materials. So it's about the tiny house is about 85% recycled materials. The corrugated iron, the rusty corrugated iron, and the old weatherboards, and the floor we did like a butcher's block floor, which was all offcuts of kiln dried Tasmanian oak from a mill up the road, and that was just bundled for firewood. And my partner Shani, was just cutting them into inch thick strips, and I laid them down on the floor like a brick pattern, and it was like a huge butcher's block on the ground. Like the batteries were ex-Telstra batteries, and solar panels were from an old school that got pulled off. So much recycled stuff, and everything had a story. All the windows and doors were recycled. Just like I remember, like being on Gumtree at the time, heaps, and buying stuff and going to pick it up. Yeah, we're so isolated up in Seymour. It was a bit funky. Like I remember doing quite long trips to pick up a couple of windows and yeah, just telling the story of what we were doing to these people, and really heartwarming to give the materials a second life and create something new and exciting from it. And you know, if you see the pictures of the truck house, you know, it's unique. It's got its own character, and part of that is just the amalgamation of funky materials, and like really cool LED light windows and stuff. So it was a really beautiful process to create in that way and have the freedom and time, you know, being the client and having our ethics at the forefront, you know, because using recycled materials is actually, if you're paying someone to do it, it's actually more expensive than using new ones. The most important thing for us was creating something that was sustainable and interesting and a piece of art, really, and in a sustainable way to suit the way that we wanted to head with our lives.
Yeah, well, yeah, there is definitely that aspect of being more environmentally friendly and using or repurposing the materials rather than buying new ones. So yeah, that's great. And I'd love to move a bit more into now, like you're living in a straw bale house.
You know, we eventually realized we wanted to be on our own property, and we wanted to have that be in community, in a beautiful, strong community, but have our own space to sort of make our own decisions in our own family. And so we bought a little block in Deans Marsh in Victoria, a little half an acre in the township. Beautiful, small, 350 people community down here. So we drove the tiny house down because the tiny house is on a 1969 Bedford truck. So we drove it down from Seymour to Deans Marsh and lived in it on a farm around the corner from our property for 4 years while we were building the Strawbale house that we currently live in, using it like the tiny as a stepping stone to give us that ability to reduce our outgoings as far as rent and such, while we were that gave me more time to work on our Strawbale house.
Can you share with us a bit more about straw bale construction and then I guess the structural aspects of building a straw bale home?
Oh yeah, sure. I mean, I fell in love with straw bale building while spending a lot of time in Wales, in England, at a community called Lamas, which is an incredibly inspiring, beautiful place with beautiful people, very committed to the earth, and living off grid in a sustainable way. A lot of the houses there are built from straw bale, and I was very inspired by a man called Simon Dale, who is very worth looking up. He's an incredible designer and very true to his ethics of sustainability, and a beautiful man. And he sort of, I got real heavy into straw bale and just how the insulative properties, which, you know, straw bale walls, can be around sort of, there's a few different numbers float around, but like around R8, which is a really high insulation value. And for our climate here in Victoria, it's just ideal because we get those hot summers but we get those really cold winters. So I sort of explain it, and when I'm teaching, it works like an esky. Yeah, whatever you've got inside that esky, you're either keeping it warm or keeping it cold. And so with straw bale as external walls with a solar passive design, and incorporated with a solar passive design, I feel is a really great way to build as far as sustainability and aesthetics, because you get that feeling of these huge, thick, you know, the walls when rendered end up being, you know, around 400 millimeters thick, and you get that. I'm sure you've seen on some photos, but those big sweeping window reveals with the curves and the aesthetics of it, but also the energetic sort of feeling of the size of the wall and the materials so user friendly. And like when we built our house, I ran a workshop to install the bales. So our house is as far as construction wise, our house is a timber frame. So the straw bales aren't actually load bearing; they're infill. So they're just acting as insulation. They're not actually taking any weight from the roof. Yeah, I specialize in traditional joinery. A lot of our house is a bit of a hybrid. So some of the like the north face, all the glazing is in a traditional timber frame. So traditionally jointed and using handmade wooden pegs to hold it all together. And yeah, the central frame is also just round timber. So cypress trees left in there round and then joint together with mortise and tenon and hand driven pegs. So that's sort of taking the load. And then the straw bales are just housed between sort of a variation of a stud wall, but it's a bit funky and different, but they're not actually taking load. So yeah, that's sort of, I suppose, the construction element of the our Strawbale house anyway. There are different ways to do it. They can be load bearing, but it just adds to some difficulties in construction as far as keeping the bales dry whilst you're actually constructing the roof on top of them. So I sort of advise not to go down that route, but I have seen it work before, and there's many ways to implement many different materials depending on what it's all about. Starting from the design, what materials are in your locality that you can collate, and what is actually going to suit your climate best and your aesthetic choices, because that's a big part of it too. You've got to really like what you're living in. So yeah, it's that amalgamation of design and what you can get. Well, we got all our straw bales from Winchelsea, which is 15 minutes up the road. Our ethics and around building materials hasn't changed. We've still, with this house, sourced a hell of a lot of reclaimed materials, local. We've used a lot of, like, most of the clay in the rendering, and all the internal walls of this house are stud walls filled with local rock and clay from the excavation from the house. So yeah, most of the earth inside the house is off the property, and we have an earth floor, which is the clay from underneath the foundation. So that was really important too. Yeah, having a sort of holistic frame of mind and design, it's important in every aspect of life to feel into it and feel what's right for you, I suppose.
Absolutely. I love the sound of all of that too, and the natural building, I suppose, philosophy or viewpoint that you have, and using as much natural as well as, it sounds like, local and what's available to you on the land. I think that is such it's just a lovely way to construct your home and to have that connection from the earth as well. And I'm wondering, how long did it take you to construct this Strawbale home?
Pretty quick, like I said. The tiny house gave us this sort of ability to, we were paying barely anything in rent of the land where we had the tiny house, so we didn't have much outgoing. So that meant that I could focus more time actually building this house. Yeah, so it really gave us that opportunity. Like, for me, like the first two, it took us 3 years basically. The first 2 years I was working. I built a couple of tiny houses and I was working for other clients throughout that time. But then the final year, I was just full time on the house here in Deans Marsh. And then in that year, we also got pregnant. So I had a bit of a deadline because we were having a home birth. So we actually moved into the house 3 weeks before Kai was born. So there's nothing like a deadline. That was definitely a fairly stressful time. But so he's 14 months old now. So we've been here for 14 months, and it's just been amazing. So.
Oh, wow. That is amazing. And to have a little one that's been brought up in a space like that from the start, I think I can imagine how beautiful that is going to be to kind of see him grow and all of that too. And
he's got like, it's so tactile, like there's round timbers everywhere, like trees, and like this sweeping stone fireplace with local volcanic stone from Colac, with like this arched cob bench, live edge timber everywhere. It's just like he's got so much to look at and feel and play with, like, and it's, I don't know, like it's just such a contrast to a sort of standard straight walled, Metricon home, or a normal house. It's certainly not a normal house.
Or maybe by the standard definition, but I'm sure it is to you guys. Well, just on that, since you were just describing some of those things, I was actually going to ask you anyway, like, are you able to share a bit more about some of the features and what you've included in your new home, and then what size is it roughly?
We had, I don't know if you saw it, you mentioned it in the email, but Happen Films did a documentary about our tiny house when we first built it. And Jordan is still a close friend of ours. And so he's been filming a documentary of our house, the Strawbale house, over the whole time period of building. So he's come and filmed 4 or 5 times over the last 4 years. And, before, like, the first time he filmed, we were living in the tiny house and we did our interview in there. And then we came to the block when it was a totally blank block. So he's yet, because of situation over the last few years, he hasn't been back to film the final roundup of, the debrief and the budget blowout, and, all that sort of stuff, like the reflections, I suppose. So they're planning to come to do that soon, and he's doing a feature-length documentary about the whole build. So we're really excited about that. So that's something to look out for, as far as like actually sort of seeing our house in a doco. But it's a very magical place. Curved walls and a big baker's oven fireplace in a sort of like Viking-esque cob hearth with this big arched round timber beam, mortise and tenon together, and there's a sweeping bluestone crazy pay floor through half the house, which like sort of snakes and meanders through the open plan area, and then that sort of leads into the earth floor, which feeds into our bedroom, which has a big traditional timber framed king size bed, and there's a whole north wall, it's like 10.5 meters of double glazed glass and traditional timber frame with big sliding doors, and which leads out, and all that glass was seconds from the skyscrapers in Melbourne, and then it leads out onto this deck, traditional timber frame deck. There's beautiful cypress decking that looks out onto this amazing garden that my partner Sean's created, with a huge veggie patch and a huge orchard, and then this like lots of natives too, with bees down the back. And like the entrance to the house is this sort of like porch, like a sort of, I suppose, some people think it's quite churchy, but it's definitely my heritage, my English heritage has come out with that. It's sort of this arched top door that I made, and like all like an arched timber truss with glass in it, and big sweeping oak braces, and extremely decadent bathroom with a spa in it, I have to say, with and a shower with a double head. Like, after living in a tiny house for so many years, we wanted to have a big bathroom, so that was definitely a decadent design feature, shall I say. It's sort of, I could froth and buzz on it and tell you about it for hours, I reckon, because like there's just so much to see and talk about with it, because every part's got its own story. It's totally unique, and it's a very special place. I mean, it's our home. It's a place we love. We feel safe. We feel held, and we feel family. Here. One thing that we sort of missed in living in a tiny for so long was like the space to have our friends and family over in a big group, and that's something we've really been enjoying, because we love community, we love people, and we love cooking and sharing food. that's definitely something that was more challenging in the cooler months when we lived in the tiny house.
I can imagine. It
Yeah.
sounds divine though. It sounds really lovely and unique, and it also sounds like an expression of you, I suppose you could say, right, and your family. And
Mhm.
what size is it? So you said it seems
Oh,
to be bigger, so you can entertain community and all of that.
yeah. So it's a modest 3 bedroom. So it's like 200 square meters. That's including a deck. So I think it's like 165 square meters of the actual house. The open plan living, kitchen, dining is massive, and then the bedrooms are a bit smaller. The bathroom is pretty ginormous, to be honest. But our focal point was the communal area because it's cathedral ceilings, which means like you've got really high ceilings, like the lining of the ceiling follows the rake of the rafters. So the ceiling height's like it's like 4 meters pretty much to the apex of the roof. So you get that like real big sort of that makes the open plan space feel even bigger, which is real cool. But yeah, so it's a big change from living in like what was it like, I don't know, 19 square meters or something for I think we lived in the tiny for like 4 years, 5 years or something full time, and then a few years sort of bits and bobs because we were doing a lot of traveling and whatever else at that time. But overall, a long time in a very small space. So, like moving into this house was, we definitely don't take it for granted. Let's say that.
Yeah, yeah. And it's nice to have some of those comforts back again too. And I'm sure you appreciate it so much as
Oh my
well.
God.
Yeah.
It makes us appreciate that. Even just flicking on a kettle. Sometimes, I mean, we like in summer, like because we have a kettle on top of the baker's oven stove in winter, but yeah, or putting on a piece of toast in the toaster is like actually a real treat, you know. It's just,
Luxury.
the awareness of usage, like I don't think we'll ever. I mean, we're very passionate about that anyway, but after living in a tiny with a small solar system for that long, you really get to know how to sort of minimize your usage of power and water and all that. We should probably be all, well, I'm not preaching, but it'd be a good idea to be considerate as a species to more considerate as a species towards our
Resources.
our resources. Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. It's that next level self-responsibility I feel. And
Oh
just
yeah.
on, just on that. So what are you doing now in your current home for power and water and toilets and grey water, that kind of thing?
Like our township, which was a real big seller for us, is off grid pretty much. It's got power. So there is grid connect to the power, and we're currently just getting solar installed. So that's sort of, we didn't have the money at the time when we were building, so we put that off a little bit. And then we're just currently sorting that out at the moment. But we have a septic system. It's called an Aquanova. It uses very low energy. It's got like a sand filter, and then it's like a bit like a Bokashi compost system in a way. So all our black water and grey water goes into that, and then gets irrigated through the backyard under the orchard, and it's like real potent fertilizer. So we're using that. Our heating is minimal. Like we have our baker's oven, which is like, yeah, you can cook on it. There's like the oven underneath and then the firebox. That's our only source of heat because we have, even in our bedroom, which is on the north side, we've got a huge window. So it's almost like you could say 15, because the house is 15 meters wide. So it's almost 15 meters of glass in the north, with the deck and the roof outside. It currently hasn't got deciduous vines on it, but the grapes are growing. They're planted and growing, but we use just a shade cloth currently in summer to stop the summer sun coming in and heating up the thermal mass of the earth floor. But then in winter, that low-lying sun comes into the space and warms up. So it's a real, and because of the high insulation value of the straw bales and the insulation we've got in the roof and the thermal mass walls internally, the house just stays very, very consistent in temperature. Like the heating isn't necessary. Like, yeah, we like cooking on it. But yeah, we don't need aircon or anything like that because of the insulation and the solar passive design. We have our hot water we use a heat pump, a Sandon heat pump, which is like the top end of the heat pumps on the market, which uses we got everything electric because we were passionate about not having gas at all. I got like a Smeg oven and cooked up for Marketplace. Yeah, it was like $1,500 instead of like $3,500 or something, and that's just electric. But yeah, so obviously when we have solar and batteries, which we're getting soon, we will be. And our water, we got 75,000 litres of water storage on the property. So we harvest all our rainwater and then filter it back into the house. So we have like 200 square meters of water catchment. So it's like, a mil of rain is a litre, like in a square meter of catchment is a litre of water. So we get really good catchment, and we get a fair bit of rain down here in the marsh. Yeah, we're good for water. We will essentially be living an off-grid life, but there will be a grid connect point on the property. But yeah, I mean, which is sort of handy if you need it. But like, yeah, our goal is to be self-resilient, really, with our food. We don't have animals, but we have a little little Labrador. But yeah, as far as we got bees, but we're planning to grow enough veggies and fruit for trade with our local community, because we've got friends that are beef farmers, lamb farmers, do eggs and that. So yeah, the goal is to be self-resilient. Well, I mean, I heard someone, David Holmgren, talk recently, and you mentioned this idea of self-resilience becoming community resilience, because as community, there's so much strength in community, and it's not just the trade of the product that's happening, it's the trade of interaction and happiness and sharing and support that comes alongside with that. And I think, yeah, just we had a big solstice event, which is quite well known around the Otways in Dean's Marsh on Saturday night. And, the feeling from that event of, and we sort of talked about this briefly at the start of this podcast, but like we are, as human nature, we are designed to interact, to feed off each other, to support and laugh with each other. And having that back into our lives now after the last few years is just like, yeah, it's really filled that void that we were feeling, which was a really sad time. But yeah, that happiness and the void, that it feels full again, which it's our human nature to search for that, and it feels really great that we've got that back now.
I mean, we've talked about community a few times, but then you add in this, storytelling and sitting around the fire and just those real primal ways of being on the land together too. And it just feels like such a rich way to live. And I know that I think especially with, lots of things happening in the world in the last few years, is that there is this return to community. On some level, we're realizing like how much we really can be disconnected and isolated, and that, we can't do it without each other. We need each other, and we all play an important role, every single one of us. Even if we may not think that we do, or we don't feel like we belong, we do. Like, and so it is. I love that. This return to living on the land does really support that, because there are so many people that want to do the same thing, and yeah, it just feels like such a rich way to live, and such an honoring of where we came from as human beings and as a species. And yeah, I'm just loving hearing just, what your what you're creating with your family and with your community and what you're doing on the land. It's really, really inspiring. And a lot of your experiences, whether it's from living in your tiny truck, or your experience of even building tiny homes, and then, where you're living now and being in community, what's maybe one of the most valuable lessons you've learned, whether it's about yourself, about life?
Well, that's a fairly big philosophical question that need a moment to consider. I mean, it sounds relatively cheesy, but believing in yourself, and also, I suppose on that same thing, it's like knowing and like feeling into what's right for you, regardless of your surroundings, or that for me, I've always strived to not judge others, and I think this is segueing into like this realization that I think about a lot. It's like you never know what is going on for another person. You just do not know what's going on inside their mind, what they've experienced, their past trauma, their lifestyle. Like, I think in a weird way, like we're all trying our best. That just might look different to other people. Yeah, and on that sort of topic of disconnect and isolation over the last wee while, like it's just more and more apparent to me that connection of community and localizing, taking the power back to our localization and community is fundamental. And this globalist authority and big companies, big tech and stuff, the power is in the people, and believing in yourself and holding your values close to your heart, and faith in life and yourself. The biggest lesson I feel like I've learned, amongst all the practical skills and all that sort of stuff, but the actual backbone to my life story is probably that.
Yeah, for sure. And there can be so much noise going on out there in the world, and all these distractions taking us away from who we really are, and taking us away from being united with each other, that it is so important to have that. I mean, it always starts with us, and then it expands out into our relationships and our community, but to really have that self-trust and self-belief. And then, as you're talking about with what you're creating, this self-resilience and self-sufficiency, and that we're so much stronger than and capable than maybe we've been told that we are. And there's so much noise out there taking us away from that true nature. So I love that. Such a valuable lesson.
Some people might really struggle with how small the space is, especially like if you're a couple, but the liberation of it is just amazing. For instance, our tiny home, in hindsight, I've lived in a tiny home. I've designed lots of tiny homes. I've built lots of tiny homes. One thing for our tiny house, the actual design wasn't that friendly for living in full time. Like, it had heaps of space, but which was at the time really important for us. But the floor space, I mean, it wasn't. So I suppose I went at the time, I was a lot younger. I went more aesthetic rather than the practicalities. I mean, I didn't know at the time what worked as much to what I do now, as far as what works when you're actually living in it. And so our house was probably more designed for an Airbnb or a weekend stay. Clever design features is really important. And I don't know, I really I'm a very personal person. I really like design. I love design, and I love people, and I like to offer my company is to actually communicate with the client and work out what their needs are, and cater for that. And I've done a lot of totally bespoke tiny houses over the years, which has been very rewarding, and I love that aspect of it. Co-creating space with a client, and sharing my knowledge and experience with them, and also incorporating their sort of dreams and visions too, and to actually have longevity in living in a tiny house. It's just really important to, I suppose, with the assistance from either me or someone with experience, like how important the layout is for you, what you actually, how you live your life. You know, you can't just jump into any space and it work for the way that you live day to day.
You just touched on there anyway. So, you build tiny homes with other people. So your business is Evergreen Homes. Are you able to talk to us just a little bit more about that and maybe any projects that you're currently working on?
Oh yeah, sure. So it's my business Evergreen Homes Australia. I'm just getting a trailer, 7.2 meter long trailer delivered next week, and we're about to start building a tiny house that I've designed as a bit of an idea of a model that can be sort of semi-replicated but but interchangeable with layout. So a bit of a project for one to take with. I'm appearing, like, doing a talk at the Tiny House Festival in September, and we will be taking that tiny house with my team to there to showcase. And so, yeah, I mean, I've done a lot of work over the years with tiny houses and Strawbale houses and natural building, traditional timber framing. I'm seeing a lot of people out there that, because of this housing crisis with the cost of land, like our area down here is just like insane. Like, and it's across the whole of Australia. Probably it's like everything's going up. It's totally unsustainable. But I'm wanting to provide more opportunity for tiny houses available in my area of the state. And, if people really like my way of design and my way of building, then, it's still possible to service the rest of Australia, which is really cool thing about tiny houses. Yeah, I think just the need for the highland value, around our way, there's a lot of farmers with huge amounts of land that really like having a hard time with their farming, making money, and are totally lovely people that would be super keen for having some tiny house rentals on their place. And yeah, just seeing like this, like a need for affordable living. Yeah, it's pretty sad that people are just getting blown out of the market. Like, people can't get in now. It's just crazy. We were so lucky when we bought our block. It was just before the explosion of cost. Premier said something about people are happy to rent, and I think that's absolute nonsense. Like, people want to own a place. Like, people want to have the security. Like, I've got friends in Torquay that have had to move like 4 or 5 times over the last few years because housing's changing. Houses are becoming holiday homes. People are buying from Melbourne, and making and so the letting market has totally changed as well. It's like people want to own their own place for security, and I think tiny houses, they're ever evolving and stuff. But like, I think it's like I'm really keen to be involved in helping people out with that. Having a home and having food and having your health is a human right, the Maslow's hierarchy of needs. You get those covered, and then you're in a state of balance. And I think having home security is really important to me. So if I can help provide that on some level with tiny houses, then that's really cool, and I'm really happy with that.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. It is a really challenging time in the housing space, and as you're talking about, like having these basic needs met, food, water, shelter, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
We all should have access to, and it shouldn't be such a struggle. And, there's obviously lots of different forces happening out there, as you mentioned a little bit earlier too. I'm curious, just with the homes that you build. So do you normally do like customization for people according to what they're looking for? Do you have different base models, or how does that work when working with you at Evergreen?
In the past, it's always been totally bespoke and custom. I'm actually moving towards having some basic models that can be interchanged. I'm very passionate about sort of my aesthetic and like what I like to build with, so there will be a certain Adam style to my tiny houses, and that's the nature of it. And people will come to me or come to go to another person to suit their style. But I want to be, building things that inspire me too. I think that's really important. So, there will be. I still will be doing bespoke tiny houses for people, but also really like it makes it more affordable for a client. If I have some base models, there can be like sort of small alterations made to, give someone a chance to amend a design to, like I was saying before, to suit their sort of needs and the way they like to live day to day, which it's very important to me to provide that service too. But as having models that are already designed, I've already got the 3D models, I already know the materials listing, I can actually offer them at a lower price, basically, unlike the totally bespoke ones, which take a lot more time to design, which is super fun. It just ends up costing a bit more, as you can imagine. But that's where the Evergreen Homes Australia is moving into, different models to cater for different people's budgets and to streamline things a little bit as far as my organization and with my workers and such, like just to make it sort of flow better all round, really, which is exciting. I'm super pumped for what's coming.
And I think also just with all the housing stuff that is happening now, that more and more people are looking towards this way of living and looking towards tiny houses as an option for living, or even weekend stays, and then also there is the Airbnb thing. But I think the most important thing is to have that, as we talked about before, the basic needs for people to actually live in full time, and then that's another story when it comes to the regulations and all that. But sure. That's a whole other rabbit hole. But if anyone is interested, actually, I did an episode number 21 on tiny house regulations, so I'll put a link to that in the show notes. But Adam, where is the best place that people can come and connect with you online, or if they want to see what you're doing with Evergreen Homes, or they want to work with you?
My Instagram account, Evergreen Homes AU. That's a good place for just like videos or and photos of current projects. I do have a website, evergreenhomesaustralia.com.au, and that my contact details on all of those. And to be honest, give me a ring. Send me an email if you want to. But like let's organise a chat and actually jam out what it is you want, and have a conversation, even a Zoom chat, because you've got to like me, and I really like that aspect of building for someone is making sure that we're on the same page, and I'm providing what they need. So get onto my website, Instagram, send me an email, send me a message, give me a call, take it from there, have a chat. It's exciting.
Yeah. And I'll put a link in the show notes to your website, to your social media platforms and all of that as well. So if anyone wants to find those show notes, you can do that at tinyhouseconversations.com. And Adam, thank you so much for being here on Tiny House Conversations with me. It's been really great to just hear your story. Love what you're doing with Evergreen Homes, and I look forward to seeing what unfolds for you in the evolution of your business, and also seeing your Strawbale home in action as well. So thank you so much for your time today and for sharing so generously with us.
Oh, thanks a lot, Lucy. Thanks for inviting me, giving me the opportunity to do it. Yeah, keep up the good work with your podcast and sharing stories, and good on you for doing it. I think it's great. So, thank you.
Oh, my pleasure. And thank you so much for saying that. I really appreciate it. It's always really nice to connect with different people in this space like yourself. So great to be here with you. And if you're listening to us at home, thank you so much for taking the time to be here with us as always. Make sure you stay tuned every Thursday for new episodes of Tiny House Conversations, and I'll see you next week. Thanks again for listening. And if you enjoyed the conversation today, you found it valuable, and you want to support the podcast, the best way you can do that is to share the love. That way I can keep bringing you more tiny house conversations to help you on your own tiny journey. So here are 3 ways that you can support the podcast. Number 1, if you have a friend or family member that you feel would benefit from hearing these conversations, feel free to share it with them, email them, text them, send them a telegram, do whatever you need to do to share it with them. Number 2, if you hit the subscribe button, you'll know exactly when the next episode is live. And number 3, if you head on over to Apple Podcasts or wherever you're listening to podcasts and leave a 5-star rating and review. Thank you so much in advance. I appreciate you, and I'll see you in the next episode.